Primal Powers. An Ashport story. Written by G.K. Lund. Dear listener, Primal Powers is set in the same universe as the Ashdale Reaper series and the Ashport Mender series, but is a standalone story with no spoilers. It follows Tegan, a hospice nurse from the Ashport books, and is set approximately 3 years before that series. I hope you'll enjoy Tegan's little adventure. Chapter 1. She didn't consider herself an expert on animal behavior, but this didn't seem normal. She'd heard the dog barking before as well. She always passed this house on her way to work. The whining was new and it struck a nerve. Tegan had never quite gotten the appeal of living with animals. They were messy, noisy, shed fur, and slobbered everywhere. Of course, there was the whole thing about them all wanting to be part of her non-existent pack, but that was beside the point. The scene in front of her now didn't sit right with her. As if to prove that point for her, the owner of the dog opened the back door to the house and began yelling at it to be quiet. It was a young man, a few years older than Tegan, maybe in his late 20s. He wore worn jeans and a tee, both with some holes in them. "Will you shut up?" he yelled at the dog, who stopped barking and kept whining at the sound of his voice. No, this won't do, Tegan thought as she focused on the small animal. She hated doing it because it was controlling behavior, no matter who was on the receiving end. Still, she relaxed, let her thoughts fade into the background, and reached out to the dog. It was an odd sensation she always found difficult to describe. She could feel herself tug at the edge of the animal's consciousness. In her mind, she sensed waves of colorful strings between her and whatever animal she connected to. Like a connecting aura, she always thought. There weren't any clear words. There never was. How would they understand them anyway? No, the communication involved suggestions, even orders, conveyed through emotions. "Don't take this! Show him!" She could feel her own anger flare at the sight of the man. The growling began at once. The little dog padded out from behind its house and snarled at him. "Oh yeah?" he shouted as he stepped away from the door. He grabbed a bat from a nearby pile of junk and began walking toward the dog. Tegan felt fear despite the growling, and it wasn't her own. She broke the connection then and could immediately see the animal's attention divided between herself and the impending danger. "That's attractive," she snapped. The man stopped with a confused, "Huh?" and noticed her. "But I suppose only a real man needs to beat someone so small." She put on a look of mock innocence as she stared at him, refusing to avert her eyes. The confusion she'd intended him to feel by saying attractive had him looking like a fish out of water, eyes all wide as he took her in. Then he gave her an appraising look that made her grimace as a sneer made itself visible on his lips. "What's it to you? This is my ex's dog. She didn't care enough to take it with her, so who gives a crap?" Tegan forced a smile then, wide and without mirth. She could guess why his girlfriend had left in such a hurry. She wouldn't even be surprised if the guy had refused to let her take her dog. "What's it to me?" Tegan raised her phone again, her Instagram account still open on her screen. "I know a few thousand who gives a crap. Care to show us?" She held her phone up like she intended to tape him. "Screw you," he snarled, threw his bat to the side, and stalked back to his door. "Remember that I pass by here every day?" she yelled after him. She sighed and looked at the little dog, who was sidling closer to the fence now that the threat was gone. "Hope that helps," she told it, and walked away, aware that the dog followed her on the other side of the fence as long as it could. The connection always made them do that. It made them want more, to belong. It simply didn't work the other way. A little shaken by the confrontation with the man, she walked on her regular path to work. She longed for the nice cup of tea she still had enough time to pick up at her regular cafe before her shift at the hospice started. Spring was well on its way now, but it was still a little chilly in the mornings and at night. She wore a denim jacket over her dark yellow dress, her favorite pumps clicking as she walked. Her mind returned to her Instagram account. She hadn't been lying to the man. She had been gaining enough followers to begin getting offers of sponsors now. It excited her that she wasn't the only one out there who loved the old styles. It made for connections on a level of equal interests she couldn't get everywhere in Ashport. The cafe came into view as she rounded the corner of a closed-down dry cleaner. Tegan stopped dead in her tracks and then began walking closer with slower steps. There was a small crowd gathered outside the cafe and some people moving around near the door. The Cafe Lavinia was a nice, quaint little place with what time had turned into retro furniture, excellent coffee and tea, disappointingly dry scones and tasty soups. It took up the ground floor of a building that looked to house some apartments above it. Large glass windows let people see inside and outside, and they had recently begun setting out the outdoor furniture as well. Tegan joined the crowd as curiosity got the better of her. She didn't condone those who stood around and took pictures of accidents. She didn't know what, but she felt something bad had happened here. She scanned the crowd but saw no one she knew. What she did see was two old ladies talking together, heads bent and not really managing to whisper. "Excuse me," she asked as she stepped closer. "What happened? Do you know?" "It is very strange," one of the women said, smiling as she approached them. Another perk with the older styles she dressed in was that old ladies like these were usually nice to her. She reminded them of themselves or their mothers. "It looks like a break-in." The woman nodded toward the door. Tegan turned and looked, and yes, there was glass on the ground, the window in the door broken. Almost all of it had fallen from the frame. "I'd say it does, yes," she agreed. "But the police don't," the old woman added. Tegan huffed. What did the police know anyway? Fumbling, amateurish? "Apparently it was a dog," the woman said. "No, Annalie," the other woman objected. "They said wolf, not dog. You heard them." "I did, but a wolf? Here? In the middle of town?" Her tone all but conveyed how absurd that was. Tegan agreed with her. They were far from the nearest forest, after all. Must have been a dog. "Was anyone hurt?" "Not sure. Mrs. Grayson was there. I hope she's all right." As did Tegan. She glanced back at the door again and saw a short, female police officer emerge, her eyes scanning the crowd. They were useless, yes, but Tegan didn't like the way the officer took in the crowd as if she could find an answer to the animal attack there. They had too much imagination anyway. At least too much for Tegan and her kind. With a quick thank you to the two women, she quietly left the cafe, sans tea and the good mood she had begun the day with. Chapter 2. As Tegan entered Ms. Crepeau's room, she could tell by the glazed-over look in the old woman's eyes that she wasn't herself. "Hello, Eleanor." Tegan sat the tray with the woman's food down beside the bed for the moment. "Oh, Gracie, I thought I heard something next door." Eleanor sat up a little as Tegan went to adjust the pillows behind her so she could sit better. "It's not Gracie, Eleanor. It's Tegan." It took the woman a moment as she stared at Tegan with apparent doubt. She was thin and frail, had become that way even more so during the last couple of weeks. Her white hair was gathered in a thin braid and her face got more wrinkled as well as she lost more and more weight. She wasn't eating enough, but that was not unusual at this stage. Eleanor had two striking blue eyes, large and slanted, and it was easy to see that she had been a beauty in her youth. After a minute of scrutiny, those eyes softened, and a weak smile broke out on Eleanor's lips. "Yes, of course. How silly of me. Nurse Byers. Of course. Is Gracie coming as well today, do you think?" Tegan's gaze drifted over a few framed photos on the nightstand. They were of a much younger Eleanor, no more than a decade older than Tegan was now, and a young girl with the same auburn hair as her mother. I don't think so. She didn't want to lie to the woman, nor did she want to remind her every day, in those moments she forgot, that her daughter had been dead for over 50 years. There were no photos of the smiling girl above the age of 14. Oh. Eleanor looked dejected a moment, as if a bad memory tugged at her mind. Then she perked up and looked at Tegan again. What wonderful curls you have today. It's a late shift. I have a lot more time then. She'd rolled her bangs into Liberty curls while gathering the rest in a loose updo in the back. Yes, I remember using so much hairspray Chris thought I'd gas the whole neighborhood. I'm sure it must have looked perfect with that lovely auburn color. Tegan smiled and adjusted the tray for Eleanor before putting her food in front of her. I had my moments. Eleanor gave a sweet little smirk. She looked at the food. I just ate. It's been a few hours, Eleanor. You should try and eat some. Eleanor huffed like a child and then tried talking her way out of it. They shouldn't make you wear those garish clothes. Tegan glanced down at her scrubs. They were comfortable and practical. Boring, maybe, but her own clothes would be a little too much here. Still, she loved the sophistication and glamour with the vintage style. Some called her a rockabilly girl, but Tegan wasn't quite on board with that. She liked the beauty of it the most, the rock a little less. Hers was a more effeminate version of it. If one discounted the tattoos, it wasn't like she cut out everything modern. She'd simply crafted it into a style of her own that mixed vintage and modern, and most importantly, that fit her. I like it. It's like walking around in my pajamas all day. Now, about the food? Pfft, I just ate dinner. Tegan felt a pang of sorrow for the woman. 89 years old, and she couldn't quite keep the world in a straight line anymore. Dinner had been yesterday. This was lunch. And with her cancer, she needed her strength. It might be terminal, but she shouldn't be in pain due to hunger as well. How about some water then, Oh, all right. Eleanor took the plastic cup from the tray and drank a little. I'll leave the tray here a while, shall I? You might change your mind. I see what you're doing, Missy. Don't think I don't just because I'll forget it in 5 minutes. Both Tegan and Eleanor smiled at that. Yes, both the residents and the employees at the hospice dealt with death. That didn't mean they couldn't be human about it. Here you go, Mr. Phillipson, came a voice from the hallway. Tegan recognized Beth's voice but didn't see her as she went into the room next to Eleanor's. Your sister had to messenger it, but she'll drop by later. Seems you have a new neighbor, Eleanor. Tegan turned and saw the woman glaring at the door. She might be old, but her hearing was perfect. Those Phillipsons are no good, she huffed, and then, to Tegan's surprise, she began eating her food with no apparent interest to spare her neighbor. How odd, Tegan thought as she finished with Eleanor and left the room. She checked in on Beth and Mr. Phillipson, who lay in his bed, apathy written all over his weathered face. He was young to be here, in his 60s perhaps, but illness didn't discriminate in that regard. The man came from an old family in Ashport, too, well-respected and large, but that hadn't helped either. Tegan wondered what his ability might be. It was odd for a Phillipson not to have one. They had married so many people with supernatural gifts for generations that it was unlikely he didn't have one. It wasn't Tegan's place to ask, though. She didn't know him well enough for that. Besides, he might not be able to use it anymore as his cancer spread and weakened his body. Tegan had seen that often enough. Their abilities were part of their physical as well as mental beings, and illnesses could affect that. She made her way inside the room, greeted Beth and introduced herself to the old man, Christian Phillipson, who was nothing if not polite despite his bout of obvious depression. Many of their patients suffered from that when they first got there. No one wanted to die in an institution, But at Ashport Hospice, they took their pride in making the stay as comfortable as possible for their patients. Usually, they would change their minds after a few days. "Byers?" Mr. Phillipson said after a long pause where Tegan helped Beth lay his belongings into a dresser by the door. "Is that a local name?" Tegan smiled as she turned back to him. "My grandparents moved here, so not as local and old as the Phillipsons." She saw the man give a nod as he eyed her curiously. She would have a talk with him later when Beth wasn't present. It wasn't polite to ask about people's abilities without a good reason or knowing someone well. It was considered private. If she chose to tell him herself, there was nothing wrong with that, and often it opened up for others to reveal their own ability. It was her experience that it was a comfort for the patients who were affiliated with the town's supernatural community to have someone to talk to at this stage in their lives. With Mr. Phillipson being the only new patient, the rest of the day went by fast with routines and hard work. They didn't expect to lose anyone in a while, at least, and those days were the most rewarding, when they provided care and talked to their patients. Tegan had only worked a year in the hospital before changing jobs. She found it fulfilling being there for these patients, caring for them, and helping them through what was a scary and overwhelming time for some, and a less daunting experience for others. Still, as she left work that day, she felt as spent as she had when working in the hospital. The soles of her feet throbbed in her shoes as she made her way out of the hospice. That distraction was what caused her to jump back as she rummaged through her purse in search of her earplugs, and a figure walked up to her. With her heart in her throat, she looked up at the community's own enforcer, those they always sent to mend troublesome happenings. Chapter 3. "Freddie, don't do that!" Tegan took a deep breath to calm herself. "Do what?" "Scare the bejesus out of me. What the hell? I just walked up to you." Tegan rolled her eyes. Freddie Miller was a big guy, tall, broad-shouldered, and strong-looking. From what she'd heard, he did not only look that way. He was dressed in a red flannel shirt and jeans. With his rugged looks, he could best be described as handsome, with soft, brown eyes and dark hair that had begun graying a bit at his temples. "There's walking up to someone, and there's sneaking up on them. So, to what do I owe this dubious pleasure?" Freddie smiled, used to being met with openness, but also apprehension. His job did that. "What makes you say that?" "Come on. There's an animal attack at Lavinia's, and then later on the same day, the town mender shows up outside my work. And not the mender I expected, I might add. It doesn't take a genius to figure out." It really didn't. The menders existed in every supernatural community and functioned as sort of enforcers and fixers. They dealt with anything those in the outside world didn't know about, things that caused problems to other affiliates of a community as a whole. They could be quite ruthless when a situation called for it, and now there had been an animal attack in town. Of course Tegan would be a suspect. "Did you do it?" Freddie asked, eyebrows slightly raised. "No, of course I didn't. Besides, I'm not that strong." Freddie simply smiled. "That doesn't work with me," she said. He snorted then and shook his head. "That's why they sent me instead of your best friend. I need you to actually explain what you mean." Tegan huffed and crossed her arms, knowing that they were the leaders of their community. "I'm not strong enough to do that. Make an animal jump through a window and attack someone. You know a lot about it." "I walked past this morning. Besides, I don't know Lavinia personally. She makes excellent tea and some decent smoothies too, but that's it." "How strong is your thought control?" Tegan winced at the direct question, but he was a mender. The social rules were different for them. He needed to know in order to do his job. The door opened behind them, and another nurse and an orderly stepped out. "Let's talk somewhere else." They fell into a quick walk through the garden out front, away from the hospice. "It's limited," she began, aware of the big guy she knew was suspicious of her. It was surreal. Her best friend was the other town mender. She'd never had to deal with either of them this way before. She did know her safest bet was to cooperate. She didn't like it, but telling Freddie the truth would be the best course of action. I can influence animals, but not for long and not more than one at a time. To get a dog, and it had to be a big one, to jump through a window and then attack someone, well, the logistics alone. Elaborate, please. I have to be fairly close. I would have had to follow the dog inside not to lose control, and then there's the imprint thing. Yes? Well, any animal I connect with, that connection isn't wholly broken at once. It takes a little time. During that time, they kind of... Yes? Follow me around. Freddie tried and failed to suppress a smirk. Love you mean? Tegan frowned. He wasn't entirely wrong, but that love wasn't real. It was induced. It was creepy. Call it what you will, but do you see a big-ass dog following me? No, there is a distinct lack of dogs in your wake. The sun was setting, but people were milling about now that the days were getting warmer. For a few minutes, the only sound from Tegan and Freddie were the clicking of Tegan's shoes against the ground. It was a wolf, Freddie volunteered as they neared Lavinia's. Things had calmed down there now. People were even sitting outside under the heat lamps and enjoying their food. The only trace of that morning was the plywood nailed over the broken window. No, it wasn't. That's ridiculous. She looked up at Freddie's face. You're serious. Where would it even come from? Freddie shrugged and indicated the cafe with a sideways nod. No idea. That's what I want to find out. Coming? What? Why? Well, if you didn't do it, then you're our resident animal expert. That made Tegan laugh. That's just sad. I don't even own any pets. That may be, but you know how to control them. He noticed her side glare. No matter how strong or weak your ability is, you know more than the rest of us. Hi, Freddie, Lavinia said as she was wiping down a cappuccino machine. She was a middle-aged woman, thin and small with graying dark hair that was pulled back into a ponytail just above her neck. A set of green eyes scanned over the both of them before she put down the rag in her hand and nodded toward a door behind the counter. Tegan and Freddie followed her into a tiny office with a pristine desk. Everything on it was tidy, to the point of 90-degree angles on every paper and pen. Lavinia was nothing if not an organized person. Lavinia Grayson. She extended a hand to Tegan. Tegan here's an affiliate too, Freddie offered after Tegan had given her own name. She's helping me with some information regarding this wolf. Lavinia huffed at his pause. It was a wolf, Freddie. Huge and threatening. I've never seen an agitated animal up close before, but those bared teeth and intense eyes? Lavinia visibly shuddered at the memory. I might not run a zoo, but I know damn well what a wolf looks like. What exactly happened? Tegan asked, ignoring Freddie's amused look her way. If he was dragging her along, she was going to ask what was on her mind. Lavinia's gaze fell on Freddie, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Tegan sighed. Well, I was here by 6 this morning as usual, she said. I was getting things ready for the morning rush. Lots of nurses and doctors from the hospital and the hospice come by on their way to work. She gave a quick nod to Tegan, showing she recognized her as one of her regulars. I had my back turned to the door, so I never saw the wolf come in, but the sound of the glass breaking sure got me turning fast. I didn't even know they could do that. How large was it? Freddie asked. Lavinia pursed her lips sideways. Best description? As big as a small horse. A wolf that size cannot have walked into town unnoticed, Tegan pointed out. The other two did not disagree with her. Regardless, Lavinia went on, it ran straight for me. I didn't have time for anything but to react, so I ran here. It caught my leg before I could close the door shut. She pulled the leg of her jeans up to reveal a bandage that covered her whole calf from ankle to knee. I managed to yank free, shut the door, and shove the desk against it. Not long after it went away, and I called you. She looked at Freddie. And some passers-by called the police, and I had to deal with them as well as see a regular doctor. Now I'm living on painkillers to get through work, and I had to get a rabies shot too. That wasn't fun. Anyone in particular you know that might have a grudge against you? Freddie asked. Lavinia froze as her eyes darted between him and Tegan. You mean this is community-related? Freddie nodded. As Tegan pointed out, a wolf that size shouldn't be able to move unseen through town. I think someone is behind this, yes. Someone with some ability to conjure a beast like that. Lavinia couldn't hide the fear in her eyes at that, but she cleared her throat and tried to help. I can't think of anyone. I know it's not my place to ask. Tegan, to her annoyance, actually shifted from foot to foot a moment. What is your boon? No, it's all right. Lavinia waved her off. These were not normal circumstances, were they? Tegan noticed her eyes pinch in a brief moment of concentration before the shade of what was undoubtedly a wolf leapt between them. Blurry and dark, almost like an artful cartoon. A small cloud of dark fog remained for a few seconds before it all vanished. You can conjure up images like that? Tegan asked. As you can see, I'm not the strongest. I know the feeling. What about the rest of the family? Freddie asked as he stepped over to the wall on the left from the door. There hung dozens of framed photos, old and new. My kids can do more lifelike illusions. My youngest daughter is a dream weaver. She got that from her dad. I'm widowed, Lavinia added, lest they'd think this was a marital argument. The rest of the family are the same, with variations of strength, at least the nearest branch. I don't think you'll find answers there. Tegan stopped in front of a photo of an old woman who commanded her attention. She had a wrinkled face and white hair pulled back into a tight bun. Hard eyes stared out of the photo, her back straight as if age could never break her. Who's this? My grandmother, Lavinia Phillipson. Both I and the cafe are named for her. Tough lady, proud. She loved us fiercely, though. Phillipson? Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm a Phillipson originally. We all are. Tegan blinked. The oldest affiliate family in town. An intricate history in the supernatural community with all kinds of abilities. Maybe you know my brother? He's been in the hospital a lot lately. His pancreatic cancer is terminal. I don't work in the hospital, Tegan said. She couldn't very well talk about Mr. Phillipson unless Lavinia knew him, but Lavinia broke that barrier for her. Then you work at the hospice? He's there, unfortunately. He doesn't have long now. Maybe that's why the wolf came for me. Freddie stepped away from the photos. Sounds like you've seen it before when you say it like that. My dad died that way, killed by a wolf. Maybe it's a curse? A way to eradicate us all? Lavinia crossed her arms and held onto her elbows. You need to figure this out, Freddie. I can't have that happen to my kids. I won't have it. Chapter 4. The curiosity awakened by the wolf attack had Tegan show up early for her afternoon shift the next day. According to Lavinia, it hadn't only been the one attack, but she knew little of her father's death. She'd been young when it happened and therefore protected from the truth. It must have been a horrible death. Tegan couldn't imagine and didn't want to. Accustomed as she was to death and the dying, there was something entirely non-violent about dying in a hospice. Lavinia's brother wasn't opposed to talking about it, but he knew little. Tegan listened intently as she sat by his bedside. He'd heard about his sister's near brush with the beast by now, and it worried him that he couldn't be there to help anymore. I'm glad they have Miller on it. It was too much with Dad. It almost took Grandma, too. A wolf had indeed killed his father. In the same cafe, no less. It had been a day like any other when the beast had attacked. It had ripped out his throat like it was nothing. That was all they had told him. His mother and grandmother had taken care of him and his sister after that. Did anyone have a grudge toward your father? Not that I know. My dad was a likable man, easygoing and quiet. I know I'm biased and that everyone talks nicely about the dead, but he really was. Well, he had 2 decent kids, which makes me believe you all the more. Tegan smiled at him. It earned her one in return. She left him to rest soon after that, the sign of fatigue all too clear in his tired, green eyes. Gracie? Tegan changed her direction and went into Eleanor's room. It's not Grace, Eleanor. It's Tegan. The disappointment in the woman's eyes at not seeing her daughter was as sad as always. Oh. Who were you talking to? Your neighbor, Christian Phillipson. You should stay away from him, girl. Watch out. Tegan walked all the way into the room. Why? Do you know him? Eleanor had mentioned her dislike for that family yesterday as well. It was kind of odd, considering most of them were respected members of the town's community. There were always exceptions, though. It's not appropriate to talk about it. Eleanor huffed and crossed her thin arms while turning her face to the side. It probably was for all Tegan knew. Eleanor was old and had grown up in a different time. Not everything was meant for sharing back then. Still, there was a wolf out to kill Christian's sister. Eleanor? She tried anyway. Was Christian your sweetheart? She couldn't quite see it. Eleanor was the man's senior by 24 years. It wasn't impossible, of course, but it was more accepted these days. That's none of your business, Grace, Eleanor spat. There was outrage in her face at even being asked such a personal question. Tegan was about to remind her she wasn't Grace again, when the woman's eyes widened at something behind her. Then those eyes narrowed into a look of... not hate. No, it was hurt mixed with anger, the pain flowing through them. You! She hissed. Me? Freddie asked, confusion on his face. Tegan startled at seeing him there. He'd changed into a blue flannel shirt with his jeans today. You lied to me! I did? I trusted you. You broke my heart, Christian. Freddie looked to Tegan for help, and she gave it more for Eleanor's sake than his. She rather enjoyed his confusion, considering he suspected her of having anything to do with the wolf attack. She sent him out in the corridor to wait while she calmed Eleanor down. It was sad that the dementia was what gave her solace some 10 minutes later when she forgot all about it, her mind on a particularly happy childhood memory as a song on her radio triggered it. Lying to old ladies? Tegan said as she joined Freddie shortly after. That's low. You know she didn't actually see me, he said. Sadly, yes, she agreed. It's been years, but I think her beau hurt her. Dementia has a funny way of bringing back forgotten memories sometimes. Beau? When you work with the elderly, you learn to use lingo they understand. So, what can I help you with? Apparently, a whole lot. Freddie was going to interview friends and relatives and wanted her to come along. It didn't help to protest that she was in the middle of a shift. It appeared that Freddie had talked to Dr. Morris, who was also the administrator for the hospice, and more importantly, an affiliate herself. There was really nothing to it. Menders were allowed the resources they needed to do their jobs, and it seemed Tegan had become one. Not long after, she stepped outside to find Freddie waiting. It was dusk by that time, and Tegan automatically pulled her cardigan around her t-shirt. It wasn't really that cold, but leaving the warm building gave her momentary chills. She wore capri pants and flats, her hair in a ponytail with bottom curls. At least that would help when walking around all night. So, where are we going? She asked as they headed straight for the large garden in front of the hospice. It was a shorter walk than following the driveway. If it's a family matter, then I want to talk to some of Lavinia's friends. They often know more about family matters than family members are willing to let on. You think it's someone in the family, then? Since both Lavinia and her dad were attacked in the same way, yes. That did make sense to Tegan, but as their feet crunched on the narrow gravel path, she never got to speak her agreement. She'd never encountered such a beast before, but the sneer that rolled through the garden had her whole body freeze like prey that knows it's too late. Tegan felt Freddie's hand close down on her shoulder and pull her back behind him as her eyes sought out the source of the growling. It was huge. Lavinia hadn't been exaggerating. The wolf emerged between some dogwood and box shrubs as it stared at them. Yellow eyes narrowed, teeth flared, its hackles raised. This animal was about to attack. Tegan had no doubt about that. How had Lavinia even gotten away with no more than a bite? "Stay behind me," Freddie said as they both backed away slowly. Tegan didn't dare take her eyes off it to look, but she was sure no one was around to help or notice. The wolf had cornered them at the right time. Can you do something?" she asked Freddie, her voice barely audible, more due to fright than any real tactical plan of not drawing the beast's attention. They had that. She couldn't see Freddie's face, but she saw his shoulders tense. "Don't know." He raised a hand. She knew enough about him to know his ability was that of manipulating light. Not creating it, but manipulating what was already there. It wasn't dark yet. And besides, nearby streetlights would be a source for him to tap into anyway. A flash of yellow and orange leaped from his hand. It looked like an explosion of fire that grew as it neared the wolf, taking on an apparent shape of rolling flames. It did nothing to sway the animal. It only took a few steps forward as it eyed them with rage. "It's not afraid of fire." Tegan's breath hitched. "It's not real, is it?" Freddie only shook his head. It couldn't be real. Any animal would shy away from flames leaping toward it, fake or not. This animal kept advancing on them, assessing them. Its tail was raised high, as was its ears. The dark gray fur flowed like waves over its strong body as it moved. Tegan had no doubt it could rip them to pieces. When it pounced forward, her pulse thrummed in her ears and she hardly noticed Freddie grabbing her hand, shouting for her to run. Plants and bushes smacked at her head and body, her feet pounding into the grass. They'd left the path. She had no idea where, only followed Freddie as his steel grip was fastened around her hand. "Hurry!" he yelled, his eyes widening at the sight behind them. Tegan could hear the thumps of the beast's paws hitting the ground. The sound echoed in her ears, intensifying as it came closer and closer. Her own ragged breath kept her from screaming as she already imagined its claws slicing into her. Freddie was the one to give up their fruitless flight. With a yank of her hand to position her behind him again, he turned them around only to find the beast had gained on them. Tegan felt a merciless shove to her chest as Freddie pushed her with a backward hand to get her out of the way. The wolf didn't give him a chance. The furious yellow eyes never wavered as it attacked, a leap of horror toward the mender as he raised his hand to protect his throat. Tegan heard a scream as the wolf crashed into him. She barely realized it was she who did it, as she saw both man and animal fall to the ground. Freddie braced himself with his left arm and punched his bent right one up, hitting the wolf below the jaw. The animal barked at the pain and rolled off Freddie as soon as they hit the ground. Tegan gasped in relief at Freddie's intact throat. The wolf skidded on the ground, grass and twigs flying around it as it got its bearings back. "Can you stop it?" Freddie shouted at Tegan. The wolf sprang again, straight for him. "What? It's not real!" Freddie raised his hands and a flash of bright, almost white light exploded in front of the beast. It veered off its path and growled as its eyes never left the mender. It wanted him dead. "It's real enough for me." Freddie moved to be between Tegan and the wolf. She couldn't even fathom how he dared. But that was his duty, wasn't it? to protect the affiliates of their community. The wolf charged again. It moved so fast its fur blurred to look like the hazy rendition Lavinia had conjured the day before. Only it wasn't hazy. "Run!" Freddie yelled as he threw himself out of the way of the beast. It was a move only someone trained to fight could have managed. The wolf's speed made it crash sideways into a tree so hard, newly sprouted leaves fell down around them. Tegan's feet wouldn't move. This wasn't her world. This was the part of it that menders like Freddie protected her from. The wolf attacked him again. Another flash of light blinded it momentarily and made it veer off again, circling Freddie, stalking him like prey. "Go away." Tegan tried connecting to it but found no mind to latch onto. She couldn't sense it like other animals. It wasn't real. But the damage it had already caused showed to be as tangible as anything else around them. It turned out to be able to assess and adapt, too, as it feigned an attack and found Freddie's lights to be without sting. They could confuse, but not hurt. Tegan wanted to scream as the beast suddenly leaped through the blast of stinging bright light. Its claws dug into Freddie's side as he fell backward with the animal over him. Tegan saw its teeth bared, saliva dripping from its mouth as it lowered its mouth to Freddie's exposed throat. "Go away! Go away! Go away!" She screamed the words more than anything, but the connection was there. A mind that felt miles away, not quite like the ones she was used to. Emotional, yes, but it could almost be put into words. The strands of threads she always felt between her and an animal's mind were there, but they were thin and fragile. "Go away!" The wolf jerked back from Freddie, turned towards her as it backed up. Its teeth were still bared and its eyes without mercy as it growled again. There was no sense of any compassion there. Tegan felt her whole body react to the immediate danger, her blood frozen, her breath non-existent. But she didn't waver. Simply kept the fragile connection between them. With a last sneer her way, the animal turned and ran. Chapter 5. "It's not as deep as all the blood would have you believe," Dr. Morris said as she examined the long red streaks of claw marks on Freddie. They ran in an angle below his ribcage, about 4 inches long. Tegan glanced down at her bloodied cardigan, which was now disposed on the floor as the doctor worked. It was the only thing she'd had to help Freddie with after the wolf had left. They were back in the hospice, but in the secret wing at the back of the building that was used as a sort of mini-hospital for the town's affiliates. If something otherworldly caused illness, this was where they would go. Dr. Morris worked here, for the most time alone with Tegan assisting if the situation called for it. Like the Menders, there were others who did their duty to the community. "Thank you," she told Freddie after the local anesthesia had set in, and he'd stopped wincing at the doctor's stitching. "Thank me? Thank you. You're the one who got rid of that thing." "But before that, you were trying to stop it from hurting me. I couldn't move." She was pretty sure that Freddie could have managed to get away if he hadn't had her to look out for. "It's okay not to be used to danger. Most people aren't. That's a blessing, you know." "I do not envy you your job," she blurted before she could stop herself. "Sorry." Freddie snorted through a smile. "Most people don't." "This is all nice and cozy and all," Dr. Morris chimed in as she got to her last stitches. "But what exactly is that thing?" The short woman sat in comfort as she did her work, an elbow propped on Freddie's stomach to get the angle right as she stitched up the last claw mark, the shortest one. Her dark hair was gathered in a short braid, and Tegan could see the crow's feet at her eyes soften and even out as the seriousness of the matter overrode her teasing. Freddie filled her in on the massive beast that had chased them through the garden. Tegan thought it was a miracle that none of their patients had been out there. The lateness of the day was the reason for that. "And you sent it away?" Dr. Morris asked as Freddie finished. She and Tegan had worked together for a while now, so they knew of each other's abilities. The doctor's was a little more lethal than Tegan's, though. Seems it's more real than we thought. That's not a real animal, Freddie said. It's not born of this world. Then how did you control it? Dr. Morris asked. I didn't really. It was a difficult mind to grasp onto, like it wasn't quite there. It seemed far away in a sense, and not truly like an animal. Likely because there's a person behind it. Freddie sat up. He winced due to the wounds in his side and from being generally banged up. The wolf was a giant among its kind. And where do you think you're going? The doctor asked. Away, Freddie said. If you didn't notice, we were talking about a big-ass wolf that's trying to kill Phillips and affiliates. Of course. You can do that after the rabies shot. Freddie looked like he'd forgotten his words. Rabies? He finally blurted. The wolf's not even real. It's real enough to leave marks, and its behavior is excessively aggressive, don't you think? Freddie looked to Tegan in a silent plea of help. She understood, but the rabies shots were not as bad as they had been. Besides, it was not her place to question the doctor. She only shrugged and got a look of mock hurt in return. Bloody doctors, Freddie mumbled a while later as he followed Tegan down a flight of stairs that led back into the hospice proper. Bloody Menders, she countered jokingly. For all your courage, you turned squeamish at the most basic medical procedures. She was rewarded with a loud snort as a response. Be glad Dr. Morris makes sure you're always up to date on all your other shots. This was nothing. They walked through quiet corridors until they reached Mr. Phillipson's room. Tegan had called Lavinia for Freddie as he got his shot, and it had turned out that she was in the same building, visiting her brother. In the midst of all the chaos, Tegan thought that was good. It was always scary for the new patients coming there, and with the attack on his sister, he'd been mostly alone these 2 days. Lavinia, she said as she knocked on the wall next to the open door. They often left the patients' doors open if they preferred it. Most did, as it made them feel less lonely to hear the general noise and bustle of people outside. Lavinia sat in a chair next to her brother's bed, a tablet in hand as he was sleeping. At the sound of her name, she turned toward them. Oh, there you are. She stopped herself as she saw Freddie. With his shirt on again, one couldn't see the wounds and bandages, but he looked worn out after the attack. You look worse than I feel, Freddie. The mender shrugged, winced, and then walked inside the room and sat down in another chair. Tegan had filled Lavinia in over the phone. Why would you be attacked? Lavinia asked. You're not a family member. So far it's been me and Dad, and that was over 50 years ago. I wouldn't know, Lavinia, but the beast seemed pretty adamant I should die. Yes, Tegan agreed as she stared down at the sleeping Christian. Eleanor had said to watch out for the Phillipsons, that they weren't to be trusted. But Tegan couldn't see any connection between this man and the old woman in the next room. Did your brother ever have a wife? She asked Lavinia. She knew the only people registered as his next of kin were his sister and her kids. No, he's... She glanced at her sleeping brother. I really shouldn't say without his permission, you know. Tegan nodded. Lavinia didn't need to. Instead, she grabbed the man's chart from the foot of his bed. Christian Phillipson, Jr. She read the name slowly as her gaze fell upon Lavinia again. Your dad's name was Christian, too? Lavinia nodded and then froze as a familiar growl rolled through the room. They all looked to the door, only to find it blocked by the hulking form of the wolf. Tegan felt her heart rate increase in a fraction of a second as Freddie jumped up. What could he do, though? They were all trapped in a tiny room too many floors up to escape through the windows. The wolf blocked their only way of escape. The growling continued as those unforgiving yellow eyes bored into... Not Freddie. Not this time. No, it was staring at Lavinia. Tegan waited for it to attack again, but it didn't. Its eyes swiveled to the sleeping Christian and then Freddie. Excepting Tegan, it growled at all three in the room, seemingly without being able to make up its mind. Tegan was certain then, and more confident after the garden. She let her mind flow to the animal, found the connection, however small, and grabbed a mental hold. She could see the wolf flinch at the sensation, but didn't let herself be distracted. "Take me to your master, little one." The wolf's whole demeanor changed at that. Its body lowered a little and its tail sank, almost between its legs as it acknowledged her ability to control it. It backed out through the door and turned. "What the hell?" Freddie mumbled. "Let's follow," she told him, and then stepped forward, her heart slowing down to a calmer rhythm. The wolf didn't go far. She didn't expect it to. She walked behind it and heard the other's steps behind herself as she followed it into Eleanor's room. The old woman was half dozing as they entered, but the wolf's presence had her jerking awake in an instant. "Why are you here?" she asked the beast, not in the least surprised at the size of the wolf. "You're not supposed to be here anymore." There was almost a whine to the woman's voice. Then she noticed Tegan and the other two. "Oh no, tell me I didn't hurt anyone else." Chapter 6. There was a moment's silence before Freddie walked over to Eleanor, his eyes never leaving the wolf that stood on the other side of the bed. "Is this yours?" he asked, noticing that the animal had its downcast, yellow eyes turned toward Tegan. "Christian?" Eleanor said instead as she gazed up at him, her large eyes brimming with tears at the sight. "You're all right." Like the wolf, Freddie turned toward Tegan. His was a look of confusion, not submission. "This isn't Christian, Eleanor," she explained calmly. "This is Freddie. He's a mender. You know who they are, don't you?" Eleanor's eyes widened at her understanding. She glanced over at the massive wolf standing by her bedside, and with a flicker, it was gone. For a second, all that remained was a thin layer of dust showing the form of the beast before even that crumbled and floated down. Tegan hardly noticed the connection being severed. It was already so weak. "Oh my." Lavinia moved a hand to her throat at the sight. Eleanor's eyes darted between Freddie and Tegan before they fell on Lavinia. "Get out," she hissed. "You are not welcome here." "Oh, apologies. I'll just leave." Lavinia made for the door, but Tegan grabbed her elbow to stop her. "Wait!" She turned back to the old woman in the bed, whose eyes radiated with poisonous anger. "Who do you think this is, Eleanor?" "Lavinia Phillipson. I'd recognize you anywhere. Can't you even leave a poor woman alone on her deathbed?" Tegan nodded to herself, and then told Lavinia to stay with her index finger in a pause motion. "Eleanor, I think it's time you tell us about you and Christian. Can you do that?" Any thought of Lavinia seemed to disappear at the request, or maybe it was mentioning her sweetheart's name. "It's not appropriate." "Eleanor, times have changed. We don't care about what's considered appropriate or not. Grace was a love child, wasn't she?" The gratitude in the woman's eyes of not calling her child illegitimate, like she wasn't real, was almost tangible. Still, it took a few minutes to calm Eleanor down enough for her to tell them her story, as a lucid respite from her befuddled mind came over her. Maybe it was too important for her to get wrong? "My Gracie was a love child," Eleanor began, her weak voice still carrying through the room. "She came from love and was loved until the day she died. She's still loved. But who will do that when I'm gone?" Eleanor swallowed back some tears and then shook her head in a decisive manner. "I was engaged. I was 19. Chris was 20. But his mother, Lavinia, put an end to the whole matter. She claimed I was too weak to marry a Phillipson. She wasn't wrong. My ability was never strong. I could conjure tangible apparitions, but it wasn't much. Small things, like birds, butterflies, usually animals." Eleanor gave a little wave of her hand, as if deeming it just as inconsequential as the older Lavinia had done. She pestered Chris to end it, used guilt. made him feel too needed in the family business. "The cafe?" Tegan asked. Eleanor and Lavinia both nodded. It was an old establishment in town. In the end, it drove us apart, and I couldn't handle Lavinia's treatment of me anymore. We let her do it to us. But Chris didn't know I was pregnant, and Lavinia made sure he didn't find out. She took out a loan to send him away to business school. I had our daughter, Grace. She was the most beautiful baby. So perfect. The old woman's whole face changed and softened at the memories that were allowed to reach her, for once by her own will. You weren't supposed to do that in those days, have a child without a father. And so, when Chris came back to town with his new wife and little boy, I stayed away. We had 14 good years, my Gracie and I. And then... Eleanor's voice trailed off, and Tegan wondered for a moment if they had lost her again. But she slapped her hand down in her lap. "That damn bus! It took it all away from me. 3 children were killed in that crash. 3 families that never got the most precious part of their lives back. And I was one of them. She's buried here in Ashport, you know. It was her home. Our home. That's important." But Lavinia didn't see it that way. Chris. He knew, of course. Ashport isn't that big. He came to the funeral. That was the first problem for Lavinia. Then he began visiting our Gracie's grave. Lavinia wouldn't have it. She blamed me for something as strong as a father's love. Of course he loved her. But Lavinia only cared that people would catch on. What they would say. Why was he visiting the grave of some... Eleanor's breath hitched. She called her a bastard girl and then offered me money to move the grave out of town. Eleanor swallowed hard and shook her head, almost looking like she was begging to have those memories vanish. Tegan felt her own eyes water and fought to keep it back. She didn't want anything interfering with the woman's lucidity. I lost my mind then. I couldn't believe her cruelty. I knew she would pester me with it until I gave in, as I had with Chris. But this was my daughter. She should have known better. I was out of my mind when the wolf came to me. I knew at once it was mine. That it would never hurt me. That it would only do as I wanted. I sent it after her. I can't really see what it does. It only followed my orders. It attacked her, sprang for her. I know that. Heard it around town afterward, too. But Chris... He reacted on instinct. Jumped in front of his mother, and the wolf couldn't stop what was already happening. There was nothing but silence in the room. I was left with even less then. All I had accomplished was giving Lavinia my own grief, the pain of losing a child, and I have never wished that on anyone. I vowed never to use my ability again. I thought I was weak, but sometimes it doesn't take much more than intent. "It happens," Freddie said. He was right. Sometimes affiliates had more juice to their abilities than they had ever explored. "Attack was never the answer," Eleanor went on. "We have these innate powers, and I thought I knew the limits of mine. I had this ember of force within me, and I chose the wrong way to make it flare up. And I never even talked to Chris once about our girl." "He loved her," Lavinia offered. "He did, Eleanor. My name isn't only Lavinia. It's Lavinia Grace. He must have named me for my sister. I know the bus crash you're talking about. My brother was in it. I was born after it happened." The 2 women locked eyes a moment, and Tegan thought she could see gratitude in the older woman, especially since she had killed the younger woman's father. "Don't ever worry about your Gracie being forgotten. My grandmother was a proud woman, but she never got the powerful grandchildren she wanted. It doesn't always work that way." Tegan admired her ability to leave the past where it was. There was little to be done now as Eleanor was dying. "Vinny," a soft voice sounded from the room next door. Lavinia turned to the door. If you want, I'd like to talk to you about Grace. Eleanor nodded, and the younger woman left. Vinny, Christian's voice sounded again before his sister could reach him. You rest now, Eleanor, Tegan said gently, and then looked at Freddie, who cleared his throat. What? He indicated something behind Tegan, and she turned to find the wolf seated in the corner, its attention on the empty door. Eleanor seemed utterly oblivious to the animal, like she wasn't aware she'd called it. Eleanor, Tegan said, her voice raised a little. The woman visibly startled to see the wolf before it vanished again. Tegan sighed. Was this really all it took? The sound of Christian's voice so like his father? This isn't over, Freddie warned her. At first, Tegan simply nodded. Then, her mind kicked into high gear and she turned toward the mender as he suddenly seemed to loom over the bed. His job was to protect the town's affiliates. Hers was to protect her patients. Tegan went around the bed so fast she almost tripped and yanked at Freddie's arm. He gave her a look of subdued amusement as she pulled him out of the room. Obviously, it would be no problem for him to stop her, but she didn't care. Are you serious? She whisper-shouted as she slapped a hand on his chest. What? You are not putting an end to that old woman because of her wolf. Did I say that? At least he was keeping his own voice to a whisper. There were too many open doors nearby. You didn't have to. She won't hurt anyone. Really, she's hurt two and killed one so far. That's not fair. No, it isn't for those getting in that wolf's way. She thinks both Mr. Phillipson and I are her ex-fiancé, and that Lavinia is her old, conniving grandmother. People will get hurt, Tegan, and not because Eleanor is cruel or vengeful. She doesn't know what she's doing. And this is the solution. She was horrified. He was right. She knew he was right. Eleanor was a danger, but Tegan would not condone this. This cannot be what you're about. She didn't mean him in particular, and he seemed to catch on to that. You think our job is all rainbows and bunnies? Try adding fangs to the bunnies and toxic gas emitting from the rainbows, and then you'll be on the right track. But she's an old woman. She's dying and heartbroken. She should be moved. What? Oh. Freddie made a grimace of mock hurt. Did you think we won't try other solutions first? We're not heartless, you know. I'll look after her. He nodded. Good. Then we won't have to persuade you. She knew the we he was referring to were the community leaders. They always had the last word if their affiliates couldn't figure things out themselves. I can control her, Wolf. I sure do hope so. Freddie got a softer yet sad look in his eyes. If Tegan failed, he might have to step in. I will control her, Wolf. Chapter 7. There were no barks this time. Only the whines and whimpers. They weren't even that noisy. The keening came just loud enough for the little dog to get the pain out without the man in the house hearing. Tegan stopped dead in her tracks. It had been a long night before Eleanor had taken her last breath. Tegan was exhausted from the last couple of weeks. The woman's pain had been unbearable the last few days, and her passing had brought a kind of relief that still resulted in Tegan's eyes refusing to stop threatening tears all the time. As she now stared at the bearded little griffin over the fence again, anger flared anew. She found herself wishing she had a wolf to enter that house and show the man a lesson in animal cruelty. The little dog had visible marks now. It was still bleeding here and there from the beating it had taken. Tegan didn't think the man had used the bat to cause it, but that didn't really matter. What mattered was that he had done it. But why? Tegan had passed by every day for the last 2 weeks, and the dog had seemed better with each day. The owner had heeded her threat. Was that as long as he could control himself? Tegan's first thought was to let the man taste his own medicine. She even began reaching out to the griffin before stopping herself. If anything, Eleanor was right about attacks not being the way to go. She needed to think differently. She locked eyes with the dog. The imprinting from last time had worn off by now, but it seemed to recognize her. It had stopped its whimpering. Tegan drew a deep breath and closed her eyes a moment before she let her mind connect with the little animal. She could feel its pain at once. It was not only physical. "It's all right, little one. Let's think of something other than pain now." She felt the tendrils of emotions flowing between them as she eased its pain a moment. Then she went to work. The little dog began doing things it would not normally have done. With its pain eased, it jumped up on its doghouse before taking a leap over the fence and landing safely on the sidewalk on the other side. Then it proceeded to walk down the way Tegan usually walked every day to get to work. She followed, close enough to keep her control, far enough away that no one thought she had anything to do with it. She was not going to deal with accusations of stealing the animal, even if it was true. The dog walked on, its tiny tail even wagging a little as its pain was suppressed for the moment. At last, it stopped by a large white house with a fence and a closed gate in front of it. Tegan sighed and walked closer. She needed to be the little griffin's hands. She opened the gate and stepped up on the porch with the dog. The sign above the door spelled out the name of the institution clear as day: Ashport Animal Shelter. The dog couldn't read that, of course, but she let it know it was a safe place. With its collar and the information there, as well as the blatant signs on its body, the people inside would know what to do about its owner. Tegan pressed the doorbell and then walked away as the griffin sat patiently at her orders. She was a few houses down when the door opened and she heard muffled voices. She smiled then and heard no more than the rustling of her big skirt and the clicking of her heels as she walked on. Her ability might be a little thing in the grand scheme of things, but that didn't make it any less important. This has been Primal Powers, an Ashport story, written by G.K. Lund, copyright 2018 by G.K. Lund, audiobook production copyright 2025 by G.K. Lund. If you want to be notified of other audiobooks by G.K. Lund, remember to click subscribe. That way you won't miss new additions to this YouTube catalog.